What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering, and we've been covering the new Terminator Dark Fate movie, also known as Wominator, with T-1000 in it. And more than anything, the movie just looks bad. I think trotting out a geriatric Arnold Schwarzenegger is enough to get some boomers out to maybe check out the film. But the Terminator franchise in and of itself has basically been backsliding for years after essentially setting the gold standard in CGI from what I remember in the early 90s with Terminator 1 and 2, more particularly Terminator 2. The rest of the Terminator movies have been a hodgepodge of near misses and outright disasters up until this point, but early projections are now coming in for Terminator Dark Fate, and it looks like the film is going to flop. Early projections using words like soft to try and continue to shill for the film, even while evidence clearly points to nobody wanted this film, nobody asked for this film, nobody's going to see this film. Now, if you remember, just 2 months ago, they tried the same tired approach that, for example, Star Wars The Last Jedi did, or more particularly, in a better example would be the early promotion of the Ghostbusters 2016 flop, a movie that everyone wishes they could forget. Anybody who ever was a fan of Ghostbusters in particular really wants that stain removed from the franchise forever. They tried, I think, when early testing showed that the CGI in a modern-day Ghostbusters movie somehow managed to look significantly worse than the originals. They tried to push out this, men don't want to see our movie, so women should totally buy 2 tickets. Now, this apparently worked to some degree with Marvel's attempt with Captain Marvel, and their men don't like Captain Marvel, so woman power, come see our movie, even though nowadays most modern Marvel movies depend heavily on cashing in hundreds of millions of dollars in the Asian markets. I'm assuming Terminator will do the same. It's actually kind of sad. It's sad to say that, you know, we here in the Western markets have to suffer bad movies because people in the Asian markets will just see whatever it is, and they're bailing out terrible movies. If you remember 2 months ago, the director of this film basically told me there was no point in seeing it. Just like how Kyle Reese came to the past to protect Sarah Connor in the Terminator, Danny Ramos will be aided by a visitor in the future in Terminator Dark Fate, Mackenzie Davis Grace, who is a human-machine hybrid. Dark Fate director Tim Miller is confident that many folks will respond positively to Grace, but he wasn't afraid to drop a few naughty words at people who disliked her purely for being a female. By the way, nobody dislikes her purely for being a female. I think the idea is that she's not a good fit in this film. She just doesn't belong. I think, like, originally, when you look at her as an actor, she seems unlikable. But maybe that's, it's hard to remember what it was like when the original Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 came out. I mean, Arnold essentially was the bad guy and kind of won people over with a tiny bit of, like, kind of his feelings side. So it's hard to know if people will eventually warm up to this character. I think that, there's a group of Terminator fans that are just like, no, it's T1 and T2 and everything else is an abomination. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. With the modern day remake, they're remaking Home Alone, they're remaking the Die Hard films. These are films that, don't need to be remade. And they pander to a tiny percent of the audience that saw it back in the day and will just see anything because that's what they do. There's still part of that small part of the population that goes to the movies every weekend because that's what they've always done. But of course, his original quote going back, if you're at all enlightened, she'll play like gangbusters. If you're a closet misogynist, she'll scare the naughty word out of you because she's tough, very strong, but very feminine. I don't think she looks very feminine at all. She looks like Justin Bieber. That's my opinion. You have this like athletic build. She looks like a dude. You can see online the response to some of the early stuff that's out there. Trolls on the internet. I don't care. I don't know what it is about these people and their curse words, but of course, I don't know. They feel like that's communicating with millennials. It's weird because it seems like, just like with the Miss Monopoly film or video game that we covered earlier today, and if you missed that, make sure you go back and check it out. That you're pandering to people for retweets, but these people don't see your movies. I mean, it's just clear. And why? Well, look at the early projections. According to MovieWeb, Terminator Dark Fate tracking for a soft debut, but will fare better than Genesis. Wow. Better than Terminator Genesis? That's like being the smartest kid on the short bus. The early box office predictions for Terminator Dark Fate are in. The long-awaited sequel to Terminator 2, by the way, nobody was waiting for the sequel. See, that's what Hollywood doesn't seem to get. Terminator 2 had the perfect ending. It didn't need a sequel. When you give the fans the closure they want at the end of the franchise, they don't need a sequel. And sometimes, even though sequels are strongly demanded, in the case of, in my opinion, movies like Broken Lizard, they're their one popular video. Only hardcore Broken Lizard fans really like movies like Slam and Salmon, and what was it? The Island movie. I've seen them all, but Super Troopers was a movie that people loved and they wanted more of, but they waited too dang long. They put out the sequel later and it just didn't play the same. At least that's what I thought of it. As somebody who saw it on day one in the theater, it just wasn't the same. And any continuation, even a direct continuation of Terminator 2, probably wouldn't play the same 20 years later. It hits theaters November 1st, and everybody is curious just to see how well it will perform in the box office. Ever since the release of Judgment Day, the franchise has seen lower and lower box office debuts. That's because people were done after Terminator 2. Not everything has to be a franchise. Sometimes movies can be excellent standalone films. Look at the horror film It Follows. I thought that film was excellent. It's rare to get a unique horror film that stands alone and is good. You don't need to make 20 million sequels to that. With that being said, the sequel pretends that the last three installments never happened and brings back Arnold, Linda Hamilton, and James Cameron. It looks like Terminator Dark Fate will have a bit of a soft box office opening when it hits theaters in a few weeks. Initial domestic box office has it tracking debut weekend at 30 to 40 million. That is probably less than they paid James Cameron. This isn't a terrible number by any means, but it does mean that the international numbers are going to have to be even bigger to get the sequel's massive budget. Exactly. Another poor film that nobody wanted that's going to have to rely on the international market. James Cameron's Alita Battle Angel earned most of its money from overseas, and the Terminator franchise usually does well globally, so we should see some pretty hefty global numbers. The Terminator Dark Fate box office estimates do put the movie ahead of 2015's Genesis, which is a good start. If the sequel ends up being higher reaches of the estimate, it could be the highest grossing debut since Judgment Day. Now, think about this. You brought back Schwarzenegger, you brought back Linda Hamilton, and you hired James Cameron, and you're talking about it might be Terminator Genesis. I mean, that is some high level, black belt level of spin. James Cameron can see the franchise continuing, of course, because he gets paid whether the movie does good or not. So a box office win will be crucial. Making a direct sequel to Judgment Day was a wise choice, but there's a lot of pressure here at the same time. It's clear that the return of James Cameron and the original cast members won't be enough to get the movie across the finish line on its own, but when combined with the direct sequel idea, it's a really strong starting point. Despite Disney's best efforts and the mammoth success at the box office, we're seeing a decline in ticket sales overall. The summer ended on a bum note, but the fall and winter are looking up, with Joker, by the way, looks awesome. Terminator Dark Fate, by the way, looks terrible. And The Rise of Skywalker, awful. It's beginning to look like the year could end on a strong note if everything goes according to plan. Box Office Pro was the first to announce Terminator Dark Fate projections. But you see all these people, again, Terminator Dark Fate likely to open soft. Here's CBR. Below Salvation and Terminator 3. I don't understand why anyone's surprised. Imagine, yeah, it makes 40 million, but that's Terminator. That's with Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton. That's with a massive marketing budget. And that is with everybody wanting a new female Terminator, right? Everybody wanted Linda Hamilton back, which I think, Linda Hamilton as a sequel with Schwarzenegger, I think they'll have some excellent kind of funny interactions, and it'll be funny for like old school. There'll be some throwbacks, but we've seen most of the film in the trailers already. Unending car chases, a couple of jokes between Linda Hamilton and Schwarzenegger, and a movie that nobody asked for and nobody wanted, but will get blamed when it fails. Make no mistake about it, there will be several articles about people just weren't ready for the Terminator, for Wominator. People didn't want to see the T-1000 because of reasons. No, at the end of the day, as I always say, along with the kind of get woke, go broke franchise, the strongest indicating factor is whether or not it's a good movie and whether or not anyone asked for that movie. The movie looks probably like it'll be a 50%, 50 to 60% reviewed, because you'll have certain critics who just give it a high mark because of the women in it, and you'll have the actual viewer reviews, which I think will be in the 60s, because you're never going to recapture lightning in a bottle, and Hollywood is too lazy to try and too risk adverse to try anything new, so they'll keep trotting these old and played out franchises out there, and they'll wonder why ticket sales continue to fall. All these months of just puking out the exact same movies that we've seen for the last 20 years. This is time you could have laid the groundwork to putting out new franchises, to putting out new movies that people would get excited about. Instead, you've chosen to just trot out these geriatric actors from the 80s and 90s and wonder why no one wants to see it. Enjoy Wominator if you're going. I have a feeling it's gonna stink. Hope you enjoyed this video. We'll talk to you again real soon. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, before you leave, make sure you leave a like and drop a comment on it. It's the only way to help the channel grow in today's YouTube environment. Above, you'll find a link to subscribe, and make sure you turn your notifications on, or if you just want to check out another video, there's one of those up there too.